It's the first hour of the night. On the 24th of August, in the year 79, or it may be a night in late October, the town below me is about to stop keeping its own calendar, and 18 centuries of very confident people will argue about the date on its behalf. I'll tell you about that later. It's a good argument to fall asleep to. My name is Frank. I have the watch tonight. You don't have to. I want to be straight with you before we start walking, because you and I don't lie to each other at this hour. Tonight is not a quiet night. Tonight is the night. The mountain that has stood green and harmless over this city for as long as anyone can remember has been on fire since the 7th hour of the day. And by morning, Pompeii will have finished being a town and started being a story. But here's the thing I need you to hold on to, and it's true, and I'll prove it as we go. Most of tonight is waiting. Hours and hours of gray, patient waiting. Most of the people under these roofs will make it out, and people sleep through the ends of worlds more often than you'd think. So you have my permission to drift off anywhere you like. Frank stays either way. That's the arrangement. That's always been the arrangement. Come on. The lanterns lit early tonight. The day went dark ahead of schedule. Let me tell you what the 7th hour looked like, because I was watching, and because a boy across the bay was watching too, and his notes are the reason anyone knows. A little after midday, the mountain cleared its throat. Then a column of smoke and stone went up from the summit, straight up, mile after mile after mile, until it stood taller than 20 of the mountains it came from. And at that height it caught some ceiling in the sky and flattened out and spread, wide and level, like branches. The boy across the water reached for the best description anyone would ever manage, and he was 17, and he got it in one: an umbrella pine. The tall Italian kind, bare trunk, flat crown, a tree of smoke, 25 miles high, standing over the bay with its roots in the mountain. White in some places, blotched and dirty in others, depending on whether it was carrying ash or stone at that moment. The sound crossed the water like weather. Not a bang. A long, low argument under the floor of the world. And here's the detail I want you to keep, because it explains everything that happens tonight. Nobody in this town had a word for what they were looking at. Not the priests, not the magistrates, not the old sailors. The Latin language did not have a word for volcano, because as far as anyone here knew, mountains did not do this. Vesuvius was where the good wine came from. So 12,000 people looked up at a tree of smoke, 25 miles tall, and most of them did what people do when the sky goes strange. They watched it for a while, and then they went back inside. By the 8th hour, the tree came down on us, not all at once, as snow. Pumice, the stone is called, gray-white, light as bread crust, full of air. It's the mountain's own rock, boiled into froth and thrown up the column, and it cools on the way and falls like gravel snow across everything southeast of the summit, which is exactly where we're standing. It comes down rattling, On the roof tiles it sounds like rain that never gets tired. On the awnings it lands soft and starts to gather weight. An inch of it every hour. That's the arithmetic of tonight, and I'll keep you posted on it, because that number is the whole plot. An inch an hour doesn't sound like much. Neither does anything, until it doesn't stop. The streets are turning gray and thick, like walking through a granary spill. The stepping stones at the crossings, those big flat stones I'd usually make you practice on, are disappearing under it, smoothed over like furniture under dust sheets. The fountains still run. You can hear them working at it, water finding its way through the gray crust, refusing to be interrupted. Fountains are the last optimists in any city. And the light. I want you to see the light, because it's the strangest, softest thing. The sun is somewhere behind the column, and what reaches us is a brown-gray dusk that started at midday and never finished. Lamps went on all over town, hours before evening. From the wall here you can see them glowing through the falling gray, window by window, like the town is trying to remember what it looks like. It looks like it's asleep. It isn't, yet. But it's practicing. Now, the roads. Because the first thing you'd want to know, if you were down there, is who's leaving. Plenty are. They started in the second hour of the fall. The quick ones, the nervous ones, the ones with somewhere to go. The Herculaneum Gate and the Nuceria Gate have been streams of people all afternoon. Carts stacked with whatever stacked fastest. Mules with their tired forever patience, families walking with cushions and folded cloaks held over, their heads against the falling stone. That trick, the pillow tied over the head with a strip of cloth, is going to show up across this whole bay tonight. It's in the historical record, that trick. Remember it when we get to the beach, at Stabiae. The roads south and east are the good roads, away from the mountain, and the people on them are making the best decision of their lives without knowing it. Most of Pompeii is on those roads by now, or will be. I want that said plainly. Tonight of all nights. Most of this city walks out of this story. The ones who study these things will dig, centuries from now, and find perhaps 2,000 sleepers in a city of 12. The arithmetic of tonight is grim, but it is not the arithmetic people assume. Leaving worked. 10 and 12 left, and lived, and carried Pompeii with them as a memory, which is the only place a city really lives anyway. And the ones who stayed, they had reasons. We'll get to their reasons. None of them were stupid. That's what makes it worth telling slowly. Walk the Via dell'Abbondanza with me one more time, because it's still here, under the gray. Still the same street I've walked 10,000 nights. The election notices are still on the walls, red paint going gray letter by letter as the dust settles into them. Helvius Sabinus, for Aedile, they say. Half the town's walls say it. The fruit sellers back him. The innkeepers back him. That was the argument this town was having yesterday. A city's last recorded argument, and it was about local politics. There's something almost comforting in that. Past the fuller's works, past the wine shops with their counters shuttered, the house of Scaurus, the fish sauce man, stands back from the street with its floors done in mosaic pictures of his own jars. Garum, the golden liquor this town shipped to the whole world. Fortunes built a jar at a time. His warehouses are locked tonight, like every night. Locks are an act of faith in tomorrow. The whole town is locked, come to think of it. 12,000 acts of faith. At the temple of Isis, small lamps are moving. The priests are gathering the goddess's things, the silver, the sacred bits and pieces, wrapping them in sacks for the road. They rebuilt this temple from the ground up 17 years ago, after the last time the earth misbehaved. And they are not sentimental about buildings. Things you can carry, gods you can carry. They'll leave in the deep night, carrying her. The dog at the grand house is barking, on and off. Not at me. At the ceiling of the world. One bark, then listening, then one bark. The whole street is doing a version of that. Duck under this awning with me, into the lunch counter on the corner, because somebody left a lamp burning and it's telling the day's whole story. This is a Thermopolium, one of the town's 100 hot food bars, the stone counter facing the street with the big clay jars sunk into it, their round mouths open. When the mountain broke, it was the lunch hour. You can read that in what's still here. Ladles across the jar mouths, cups on the shelf mid-stack, a customer's coins on the counter, small money, lunch money, put down and never picked up. Whoever set them there heard the sky change its mind, stepped into the street to look, and became part of the crowd deciding. The diggers will find counters like this one all over town, and in one, sunk in the jar under the counter where a barman banks his takings, a whole day's earnings and then some, hundreds of coins, 3 fistfuls of bronze and silver. A good day, right up until the 7th hour. The barman covered his jar, and I like to believe he's on the South Road right now telling his family the money's safe under the counter, and the strange thing is he's right. It will be the safest money in Italy for 1700 years. An empty bar with the lamps still on is one of the loneliest kind sights there is, and one of the kindest too. Lunch was served today. The wine was watered, honestly. The town worked, right up to the hour it stopped, and the coins on the counter are the receipt. Everything in this city tonight is turning into a receipt. Down the slope now, to the edge of things, where the town meets the water. The river harbor. Pompeii is a port, friend. People forget that. Later, when the sea has wandered off westward and left the ruins standing inland like a beached hull. Tonight the Sarno mouth is right here below the walls, and its little harbor has had the worst afternoon of any harbor in the world. The boats that could put out did, hours ago, riding deep with families and strongboxes. What's left is what's always left. Hulls hauled up for repairs, a lighter with a sprung plank. The ferryman's skiff and the sea itself is wrong tonight. Confused swells with no weather behind them, water the color of slate, and moving like it's being stirred from below, which it is. The fishermen who stayed are standing on the quay in a knot, reading it the way they read everything, and coming up with nothing. There's no page for this. Across the bay, if the ash thins for a moment, you can see the running lights of ships standing off, keeping their distance, the navy among them by morning. The sea is a road out of nearly every trouble this coast has ever had. Pirates, fires, fevers. The boats always worked. Tonight the one road that always opens is closed, and the stone rain is falling on the water too, hissing, floating. The pumice bobbing on the swells in gray rafts, stone that floats. The fishermen will tell their grandchildren about it. The ones who go now, and their grandchildren won't believe them, and they'll be wrong not to. So that's the town at full dark, and here's where I tell you how tonight is going to go, so your shoulders can come down off your ears. We're going to walk the watches the way we always do, one at a time, slow, and because this is the last night, the night all the stories get told once more, I'm going to tell you this town's stories. The night the games went wrong, 17 years of scaffolding, a banker's receipts, an admiral across the water who is about to do something brave and unnecessary and fall asleep in the middle of it. You'll like him. Everyone likes him. The mountain will do what it does, regardless. It needs no attention from us. And the worst of it keeps until nearly dawn, and when it comes I'll tell it to you gently and we'll keep the proper distance. There is nothing to flinch at between here and then. Only gray snow and lamplight and a city talking quietly to itself about whether to go. The pumice is at your ankles now, an inch an hour, remember? The awnings over the market stalls gave up an hour ago, softly, one by one, like tired arguments. They used to say this mountain would stand through whatever the summer brings. People said it to me at this gate, on quiet nights, 100 times. It'll stand, they said, so will the town. Half right. Hold my lamp while I call it. First watch of the night, and all is well enough. First watch of the night, and the town is still deciding. You might wonder why a man walks his rounds on a night like this. Habit, partly. But there's a better reason, and it's the reason for everything I'm going to do between now and dawn. A town is not its walls. A town is its stories, and tonight is the night they all get told once more, so that somebody carries them out through the gates. That's watchwork too. Maybe that's the only watchwork that ever mattered. So come stand where I'm standing, at the east end of town, and look at the amphitheater. Even tonight it's worth looking at. The great oval bowl, oldest stone amphitheater in the world. 20,000 seats. Built when your great-great-grandfather's Rome still did its fighting, in temporary wooden stands. The pumice is drifting into it now, filling the seats, section by section, patient as an usher. And the arena floor is going white, gray, and smooth, like a frozen pond. 20 years ago, this quiet building was the scandal of Italy. It made it into the histories of Rome, this bowl, for one loud afternoon. And since we have hours to spend and gray snow to walk through, I'm going to tell you about the day Pompeii got itself banned from its own games. It's the story this town would want told first. They were never once embarrassed about it, which is, honestly, the most Pompeii thing about the whole affair. The year was 59, 20 summers before tonight. A man named Livius Regulus, a senator who'd been thrown out of the Senate, which tells you something about him already, decided to buy back a little glory by putting on gladiator games here. Big games. And to big games come the neighbors. Nuceria is the next town down the road, maybe a dozen miles. Pompeii and Nuceria disliked each other in the fine old way that neighboring towns do, over borders, over markets, over which town's fish sauce was honest, over nothing at all, over everything. Forever. And on games day, thousands of Nucerians came up the road and sat down in that bowl next to thousands of Pompeians, in the summer heat, with wine flowing. It started with taunts. It always starts with taunts. The histories say exactly that. It began with the kind of insults small towns throw at each other across a games crowd. Somebody's town was full of thieves, somebody's town smelled of fish, then somebody threw a stone, and then a great many people threw a great many stones, and then, because this was a gladiator crowd and steel was in fashion, swords came out. Pompeii had the numbers and the home ground. When it was over, Nucerians were carried home wounded, and worse than wounded. Parents mourned. It went all the way to the emperor, and the emperor, who did not want to touch it, handed it to the Senate, and the Senate handed down the strangest sentence a sports town ever received. "10 years. No games. The Senate of Rome banned Pompeii, this one town, from holding gladiator games for 10 full years, the way you'd take a toy from a child who'd bit somebody. Regulus, the disgraced senator who'd hosted the whole mess, was exiled. The illegal fan clubs, the ones that organized the rowdiest sections, were dissolved by decree. Sit with the strangeness of that. There was a body in Rome, ruling an empire from Britain to Egypt, wars and famines and frontier legions on its desk, and it took an afternoon to discuss football trouble in a middle-sized town in Campania. Some things, I suspect, are true in every city that will ever be built, and one of them is this: nothing embarrasses the authorities like a crowd enjoying itself in the wrong direction. And Pompeii's response? Somebody here went home and painted the riot on his wall. That painting exists, friend. It survived tonight. It survived everything. And the diggers found it centuries later. The amphitheater, seen from above, the awnings out, little figures brawling across the arena, and up the stairs and out into the streets. Painted with real affection, the way you'd paint a famous local wedding. Not shame, commemoration. The town put its riot in the parlor. I've watched this town for a long time, and I'll say this in its defense on its last night. It never once pretended to be better than it was. There are worse ways for a town to be. The ban didn't hold 10 years, of course. Bans never do. After the earthquake shook everything sideways, and we're coming to the earthquake in the next watch, Rome quietly let the games come back. Some say the emperor's wife had family money in these streets and put a soft word in. Either way, the bowl filled again, the awnings went out again, and the town went back to its favorite argument. Walk down past the barracks with me now, behind the theater, where the gladiators live. There's lamplight under the colonnade tonight, and low voices. Big men, listening to the mountain the way everyone's listening to the mountain, with their gear on the pegs and their options open. Fighting men know how to wait. It's most of the job. The walls of their barracks are covered in scratched writing, and I've read every inch of it on quieter nights. Because the NightWatch reads everything. Tallies of bouts, prayers, bragging, and the best of it, scratched deep so it would last. Celadus the Thracian, Suspirium Pullarum. Celadus, the sigh of the girls. He wrote it about himself, or a friend wrote it laughing, and either way it's the truest kind of history, the kind nobody wrote for posterity. 20 centuries from tonight, scholars with soft hands will translate that scratch and smile at their desks. The girls sigh. On the wall of a barracks, in a doomed town, under gray snow. If you want to know what a city was, skip the temples, read the wall. Two more stops in the pleasure quarter, because the riot wasn't the half of what this end of town got up to. The theaters, the pair of them, sit right here behind the barracks. The big open one holds 5,000 under the sky, and beside it the little roofed Odeon, the jewel box, built tight and clever so a liar carries to the back row. Between them, this town heard everything. The old comedies, the mimes, the flute men, the famous pantomime dancers who had fan clubs rowdy enough that Rome banned a few of those too. This town's entertainments were always getting banned. It never took. And here's my favorite piece of theater business, painted right into the game advertisements on the walls outside. After the headline, the fighters, the beast hunts, the notices add the amenities, and the sweetest 3 words in the Latin language for a man baking in a stone bowl in August: vela erunt. There will be awnings. Shade, friend. They advertised shade. Great masts and rigging crews, sailors' work, hauling acres of canvas over the crowd, and the town would check the notice for those 2 words the way you'd check a forecast. Somewhere in the record of every city, if you dig, you find the little comforts written down bigger than the spectacles, because the spectacles change and the sun doesn't. 20,000 people roaring at a beast hunt is history. Vela errant is civilization. The awning crews left on the first carts, being sailors, being weatherwise. The masts stand bare over the big theater tonight, catching gray snow in the rigging sockets, and the Odeon's little roof is holding its load so far, tight and clever to the last. Here's what the riot story is actually for, and then I'll call the watch. 12,000 people lived inside these walls, and they cared to the point of thrown stones and Senate decrees about games, about their team, about their town being better than the town 12 miles south. People will tell you, in centuries to come, that the ancients were marble men, all philosophy and posture. Don't believe it. This town queued for bread, bet on fighters, scratched jokes on walls, packed a stadium, taunted the away fans, and took it, occasionally several stones too far. They were, in other words, completely alive. That's what tonight is taking, and I want you to know precisely what it is before it goes. Not a museum. A loud, petty, generous, fully living town that loved things too much. The bowl behind us holds its 20,000 empty seats like a cupped hand, filling slowly with gray. All that shouting, gone down the road south. The pumice has reached the second row of seats. It comes on, an inch an hour, without malice and without mercy. The way arithmetic comes on. Second watch of the night, and the old grudges are all asleep. The pumice is past your shins now, and the walking has a wading quality. So we'll go slow and I'll tell you about the earthquake, because you cannot understand tonight why they stayed, why they weren't fools to stay, without the 5th of February, 17 years ago. The year was 62. It was just past midday, a winter midday, market stalls out, baths full, and the ground under Campania moved. Not a shiver, a real convulsion, the kind that rearranges masonry. We know the very consuls in office that year because a philosopher in Rome, Seneca, sat down and wrote the disaster up while the dust was still in the air. He was writing a book about the causes of things, earthquakes among them, and Pompeii became his freshest example. Much of this town broke that afternoon. Temples cracked and slumped. Colonnades came down. Statues of important men on important horses pitched over into the forum. Out in the countryside, and this is the detail Seneca couldn't let go of, a flock of 600 sheep was found dead near the mountain, whole, unmarked, as if they'd simply agreed to stop. He reasoned that some bad air had come up from under the earth, heavier than the good air, settling low where the sheep breathe. He was closer to right than he had any business being, 17 centuries before anyone could prove it. Gas from below. The mountain's breath, leaking early. The sheep were the first message Vesuvius sent, and the only creature in Campania who read it correctly was a philosopher who then filed it under interesting. I want to show you how this town remembered that day, because it's one of my favorite things inside these walls, and after tonight nobody will see it for a very long time. There's a banker here, or was, named Caecilius Jucundus, a careful man, bald in the statue his family kept of him, with a wart on his chin the sculptor honestly included, which tells you the family liked the actual man and not some marble idea of him. His business was auctions and lending, and his filing was immaculate. Over 150 wax tablets, receipt after receipt, this sum received, this witness present, signed, dated, stacked in his study. The diggers will find the whole archive, a man's working life in a box. And here's the thing that stops me every time. The receipts stop in January of 62. 3 weeks later, the ground moved. In the family shrine of that house, somebody, the old man or his sons, put up 2 small marble reliefs. Not gods, not heroes. The earthquake itself. There's the temple of Jupiter with its columns lurching sideways, carved mid-topple. There are the equestrian statues skidding. There's the water gate coming apart, carved carefully, paid for properly, and set up in the household shrine, where you'd normally keep your ancestors and your luck. A banker commissioned art of the worst day his books ever saw, and hung it where he prayed. People do this. People have always done this. You don't put the disaster on the wall to remember the fear. You put it up because you got through it. It's a receipt, friend. Paid in full, survived, witnessed. The most human filing a filing man ever did. Now step back out into the gray and look at the scaffolding, because it's everywhere. And tonight it finally makes sense. 17 years since the quake, and half the grand buildings of this town still wear their wooden cages. The Temple of Jupiter, patched and propped. The Basilica, half mended. Water lines dug up and relayed street by street. 17 years. The masons and the magistrates and the money have been having a very long conversation. And stone is patient, and committees are eternal, and I've joked about that on other nights, in other towns, and it's still funny tonight. But it's also the answer to the question everyone will ask about this place forever. Why did they stay? Because they had done this before. That's the whole answer, and it deserves respect. 17 years ago the world broke, and they rebuilt it. With their own money, mostly. Rome sent sympathy. A freedman here, rich from business but barred from office because of how he'd started life, paid to rebuild the temple of Isis from the ground and put it in his 6-year-old son's name, and the town made the boy a councilman for it. 6 years old, youngest patron of a temple in the empire, because his father understood exactly how the ladder worked and bought the kid a rung. The temple was the newest, brightest building in town. It was proof. This place takes its hits and comes back better. So when the ground shook again this week, and it did, for days, Nobody ran. Shaking was a known thing. Shaking was survivable. 17 years of scaffolding said so. The town had learned a lesson, learned it deep, learned it in marble. It was the wrong lesson. That's not their fault. It was a very good lesson for a different disaster. Now, that promise from the top of the night. The date. Pull up a drift of pumice and get comfortable, because this is the sleepiest good argument in all of history. For centuries, everyone knew tonight's date, the 24th of August. It's in the boy's letter, or at least it's in the copies of the boy's letter, which is where the trouble starts, because Roman dates got miscopied by tired monks the way anything gets miscopied, and different old manuscripts of the same letter give different days. August, October. One says November. Then the diggers started noticing things. The sleepers wore heavy fabrics, layered. Braziers stood out in rooms, not stored for summer. The fruit in the shops ran to pomegranates and walnuts and chestnuts. Autumn shelf, not August's. The big wine estates outside the walls had finished their harvest, trodden it, and sealed the new wine into their buried jars, and no farmer on this bay ever sealed the vintage in August. And then, a few years into your century, friend, a workman's charcoal scribble turned up on a wall in a house that was being redecorated when the mountain broke. A date, the casual kind a plasterer writes, to mark his progress. The 16th day before the kalends of November, October the 17th. Charcoal doesn't survive a winter on a wall. The house was being plastered days before the end. So it was probably October. An autumn night, not a summer one. And the bookend line this town kept saying, about whatever the summer brings, lands a little differently, doesn't it? The summer had already been survived. That's the joke the mountain told, if it told one. I'll keep saying August out of respect for the boy who was there, and you can keep both dates in your pocket. The town doesn't mind. The town, of all towns, knows the difference between the date on the receipt and the thing that happened. While we're sorting the record from the rumor, let me give you the giants, because a century from tonight, that's what people will be saying happened here. A historian named Dio, writing 100-some years on, good on politics, fond of a wonder, will set down what the story had grown into by his day, that in the days before the mountain broke, beings of more than human size were seen walking the countryside, wandering the towns, drifting through the air, and that trumpets were heard from nowhere, giants on the roads of Campania, the old race the poets buried under volcanoes, out for a look around. Nobody in Pompeii tonight has seen a giant, friend. I've been on every wall of this town all week, and the largest thing on the roads has been a grain cart with a bad axle. But I'm not going to sneer at the giants, and here's why. A story is what people build when they need the size of a thing said out loud, and the facts won't say it. Smoke columns 25 miles tall. Sounds with no source. The ground breathing. Give that 100 years to walk from fireside to fireside, and of course it grows shoulders and a face. Rumor is just grief, learning to talk. The homework boy across the bay, meanwhile, will write down only what he saw, weigh it twice, and apologize that it isn't grander. Both accounts survive. 20 centuries of readers get to choose between the giants and the teenager. And the wonderful thing, the thing that gives me hope for the whole species, is that history chose the teenager. The careful account 1. Remember that some night when the loud version of anything seems to be winning. Somewhere there's always a kid with a lamp, taking honest notes. Let me lay out the week's warnings the way the mountain sent them, one at a time, so you can watch 12,000 reasonable people miss every one. For days before this morning, small earthquakes, tremor after tremor, dishes chattering, dogs restless. The boy across the bay writes it down plainly. The shocks weren't judged particularly alarming, because in Campania they're ordinary. You've lived here long, you've felt 100. The ground grumbles here the way old houses tick at night. Warning number 1, filed under weather. The wells went strange. Springs that had run steady dropped low or quit, out in the farm country toward the mountain's feet. A mountain gathering itself pulls the groundwater about. We'd say much later. A dry summer, they said then, sensibly. Warning number 2, filed under drought. The sheep, 17 years back, and the bad air. Warning number 3, filed by Seneca himself, under interesting. And the mountain itself the whole time wore vines to the shoulders and sent down the black soil that grew the best wine in Campania, and no one alive, no one's grandmother's grandmother, had ever seen it do anything but stand there being generous. The town's entire memory of Vesuvius was gifts. Here's the sentence I want you to take from this watch. And it's a gentle one, I think, not a cruel one. Nobody ignores warnings. People file them. Filing is what a mind does with a thing it has no drawer for. This town had drawers for earthquakes, for drought, for bad fish, and worse emperors. It did not have a drawer for the mountain is a door. Nobody did. The word didn't exist. The pumice is at your knees. Third watch of the night, and the ground remembers. Now we leave town for a watch. Lift your eyes over the wall, past the harbor, across 19 miles of black water to the far arm of the bay, where a scatter of lights marks Misenum, the great naval base of Rome. Half the Western Fleet sits at anchor there, and in a villa above the ships lives the man in charge of it, and I've been saving him for the deep of the night, because he's the best company in this whole story. His name is Pliny. History will call him Pliny the Elder, to tell him apart from his nephew, the 17-year-old with the good eye for trees, who is in the same villa tonight. The Admiral is 55, heavy-set, asthmatic, and the most furiously curious man in the Roman world. He has written, among much else, a natural history in 37 books. An attempt, one man's attempt, to write down everything. Stars, storms, elephants, bees, painting, medicine, the habits of the moon. He sleeps little and reads always. He has a slave read to him at dinner, in the bath, in the litter. He says, and people quote him already, that no book is so bad that nothing can be got from it. I've always liked that in a man. Generosity toward boring books is generosity of a high order. This afternoon, while Pompeii watched its sky go dark, the Admiral was doing what he always does after his cold plunge and his lunch, lying down with his books in the sun. His sister, the boy's mother, came to him with news. There was a cloud, she said, rising across the bay. Unusual size, unusual shape. He called for his sandals. He climbed to high ground and looked, and what he saw was the umbrella pine, the whole terrible tree of it. And here's what I want you to understand about the next hour. His first response was joy, not fear. The author of the natural history looked at the strangest thing the bay had ever produced and thought, I have to see that closer. He ordered a light cutter made ready. He invited the boy along. The boy, and bless him for the honesty of his own account, said he'd rather stay and do his homework. His uncle had assigned him writing exercises. That detail is real, it's in the letter, and it should make you smile at the bottom of history's saddest night. The fleet is spinning up, the sky is a tree of fire, and a teenager says he has homework. Then, as the Admiral was leaving the house, a message arrived, and the whole night changed shape. It was from a woman named Rectina, a friend, whose villa sat at the foot of the mountain itself. Her note was short because her time was. The ships were her only way out, the roads were already gone. She was asking to be fetched from under the thing itself. And the scholar put down the scholar and picked up the Admiral. He ordered out the quadrimes, the big four-banked warships, not one cutter but the fleet's heavy hulls, and he set their bows straight at the mountain, to pull Rectina and anyone else on that deadly shore off it. What had begun as curiosity, says his nephew's letter, he finished as a hero. He steered directly where everyone else was fleeing from, holding his course dead into the danger. Hold that picture. Warships rowing north across this same black water we're looking at, into the fall of stone. Ash starts to land on the decks, hotter and thicker the closer they row. Then pumice, then blackened stones. The sea itself is misbehaving. The shore they're aiming for is clogging with debris, the water suddenly shallow where it shouldn't be. His helmsman, a professional, tells him plainly, "Turn back," and the Admiral gives him the answer that will get quoted for 2,000 years, in every language, on every sea. "Fortes fortuna iwate," fortune favors the brave. Take her to Pomponianus. Pomponianus is another friend, down the coast at Stabiae, 4 miles south of Pompeii. Said to me, close enough to be in trouble, far enough to still have a beach. They can't reach Rectina's stretch of shore, so they run south along the Fall of Gray, and they land, and there on the sand is Pomponianus with his household and his luggage, ready to sail the moment the wind allows. The wind does not allow. The same onshore wind that carried the Admiral in is holding everyone else pinned. So picture the scene his nephew later reconstructed from witnesses, because it's one of the great scenes. The Admiral comes off his warship onto a panicking beach, ash falling, mountain roaring, and he is calm the way furniture is calm. He embraces his frightened friend. He asks for a bath. A bath. He bathes, he dresses, and he sits down to dinner, and he is cheerful all through it. Or, says the letter with its perfect honesty, he pretended to be, which from the outside is exactly as brave. From the dinner table at Stabia they can see the mountain burning in the dark. Broad sheets of flame on the slopes, and fires like beacon points where farms and villas are alight. The company is terrified. The Admiral, working his way through dinner, offers the room a comfort. Those flames, he says, are just abandoned farmhouses burning, hearth fires left in empty houses, bonfires of carelessness, nothing more. He almost certainly knew better. The boy thought so too. You can feel it in how he wrote it down. It doesn't matter. He wasn't reporting. He was steadying. There's a kind of lie that's really a blanket laid over a frightened room, and I won't hear it called dishonesty. It's watchwork. He had the watch at that table, and he kept it. And then, friend, he did the most extraordinary thing anyone does in this entire story. On the beach of the apocalypse, in a house filling slowly with fear, he went to bed. Not figuratively. He retired, lay down, and slept. Deeply, truly, audibly. His breathing, the letter says, heavy and rasping because of that thick chest of his, was heard by the people passing his door. They stood in the corridor of the end of the world and listened to the Admiral snore. That detail crossed 19 centuries to reach you tonight, and I want you to hold it close, because you're lying in the dark yourself, listening to a voice while the world does whatever the world is doing. History kept a man snoring. Of all the treasure this bay lost and kept tonight, it kept that. The bravest sound in the Roman record. A man so sure the watch was set that he slept and let them hear it. While the Admiral sleeps, let me tell you how a man gets 37 books written, because his nephew left us the daily routine, and it is the most restful, ambitious life ever recorded. He rose in the dark, always, working by lamplight hours before dawn. He'd call on the emperor before sunrise, that being when emperors received, do the empire's business, and be home by midday. Then the sunbath, lying out with a book being read to him. Then the cold plunge, a bite to eat, a short sleep, and then, refreshed as if the day were new, he worked through to dinner. At dinner, a reader stood by, always, and the Admiral took notes between courses. He took notes in the bath, he took notes in the litter as slaves carried him through Rome, and in winter he had a secretary walk beside him wearing gloves, so the cold couldn't cost him a single line. He scolded his nephew once for walking somewhere. "You could have been carried," he said, "and used the hours." He believed any moment not spent reading or writing was a moment lost, and he mourned lost moments the way other men mourn money. The result, 160 notebooks, written minute, front and back, his whole library of extracts and observations, and a rich collector once offered him a fortune for them, and he turned it down flat. He left them to the boy instead. I tell you this at the sleeping man's door for a reason. People think a life like that must be frantic. Stand here and listen to him. The most industrious man in the Roman world is the only person on this entire bay getting a good night's sleep. Work with your whole heart and rest with your whole chest, friend. It's all one discipline. He'd tell you so himself, between courses. A word about the ships themselves, while they ride at their anchors off Stabiae in the falling gray. Because you've never been aboard a quadrireme, and tonight's as good a night as any. Warships, the big four banks, the heavy hulls of the Misenum fleet. 100 and some oars aside when they're pulling, and the pulling is the thing I want you to hear. A warship under oars moves to a beat, a man at the stern calling or piping the stroke, and every blade in the water obeying it, hundreds of backs bending to one count, catch, pull, feather, and again. In a calm you can hear a fleet before you see it, a heartbeat coming over the water. That's the sound that crossed this bay today, into the ash, when everything else with a hull was running the other way. Rome built these ships to break other ships. Their finest afternoon, it turns out, the one history kept, was spent as ferries, hauling frightened households off beaches, packing decks built for marines with children and grandmothers and one indignant lapdog per family, if I know beaches. In the days after tonight, the fleet will work this shore end to end, pulling survivors off the sand, and the fussy scholar who commanded it will have signed the order that set it moving before he lay down to sleep. The rowers are resting on their oars out there right now, waiting on the wind and the Admiral, ash sifting onto the decks, the beat silent. Hold that heartbeat sound anyway. Catch, pull, feather, and again. It's the tempo of every rescue that ever worked. Not frantic, friend, regular. Panic is loud and saves nobody. A steady stroke, kept up long enough, empties a whole beach. Back at Misenum across the water, the other Pliny is having a quieter, stranger night, and his part matters more than anyone's, so give the boy his watch. 17 years old, alone now with his mother, the fleet gone with his uncle. The tremors are constant, the villa creaking around them. And how does he spend the evening? He writes it himself, with the embarrassment of a man remembering being young. He asks for his book of Livy, the historian, and reads, and takes notes, as if nothing were the matter. Through tremor after tremor, with the tree of fire across the bay, the boy reads his history homework by lamplight. A family friend from Spain visiting sees mother and son sitting there, she in her chair, he with his book, and scolds them both for their calm. They keep sitting, he keeps reading. You can call that shock, or youth, or the same steadiness that's snoring at Stabia. It runs in families. But here's what it actually was, though nobody in the room could know it. It was history protecting its witness. Because this boy, this homework boy, is the only person who will ever write down what happened here as someone who saw it. 2 letters, written years from now to a historian friend who asked, "Every hour I've given you tonight. The pine tree, the pillows, the snoring, the flames explained away at dinner, all of it survives, because a 17-year-old was the noticing kind, and lived and remembered. Empires keep their accounts in marble and lose them. What survives is a kid with a lamp, reading through the tremors, storing the whole night away without knowing it. The pumice is at your thighs, friend. Stay with me." 4th watch of the night, and across the bay, a brave man is snoring. Back inside our walls now, for the hardest, quietest hours, the ones that belong to me and the falling gray. Middle of the night, the pumice waist high in the open streets, and the town has changed its sound. The roofs are going. I want to tell you how they go, because it isn't what you'd think. There's no crash and thunder about it. A Roman roof is terracotta tile on timber, built for rain, and rain always leaves. This doesn't leave. It gathers, an inch an hour, hour over hour, until some rafter somewhere finishes its arithmetic. First a tick, then a long wooden sigh, like a ship settling, and then a soft, heavy whump, muffled by the very stuff that caused it. And a new gray drift where a dining room was, then quiet again. All over town, at intervals, all night. Tick, sigh, whump. The buildings are lying down, one at a time, gently, like tired animals. The people still here have read the arithmetic too. They've moved downstairs, into doorways, under the strongest vaults. Some have made the opposite bed and gone up, onto terraces, to stay above the rising gray. Both bets are reasonable. Neither is the right one, and I won't pretend otherwise to you. But I'll also tell you, right now, in the dark, there's no way for them to know that. The only clocks are the tremors and the tick of tiles, and every family in town is doing sums by lamplight with no good numbers. And still, under it, if you know how to listen, the fountains. Fainter now, throats half choked with gray, but running. The water hasn't given up on the town. Water never does. It just changes what it's for. Let me tell you who stayed, because the ones who stayed deserve names for their reasons, not judgment. Some stayed for property, the strong box, the shop, the stock. You can call that greed from a comfortable distance of 20 centuries. Up close, it's a family's entire life sitting in one room, and the roads full of strangers. Some stayed for people, the grandmother who can't walk to Nuceria, the wife in her 9th month, the sick child. Households where leaving meant choosing whom to carry. Some stayed because the last time the world shook 17 years back, the ones who kept their heads came out ahead, and panic looked like the beginner's mistake. And many stayed for the simplest reason of all, the one I have the most patience with at this hour. They believed it had to stop soon. Everything in their experience said so. Rain stops. Storms pass. This was rain. Strange stone rain, but rain. You waited out rain. Nobody on earth had the one fact that mattered, which is that a mountain can hold its breath for a night and then let it all out at once. In the bakery on our street, the ovens were loaded this evening. Force of habit or force of hope. 81 loaves, scored, in 8 wedges the way they've always been. The baker banked his fire and waited with everyone else. I'll tell you now, because it comforts me. Those loaves will outlast the empire. The diggers will find all 81, black and perfect, still in the oven, and put them in glass cases, the most famous bread in the world. Nobody's last work is wasted, friend. Sometimes it just waits longer than the baker. "4 miles up the coast, our neighbor Herculaneum is having a different night, and I owe you the truth of it, told at the distance we agreed on. Herculaneum sits on the mountain's seaward foot, west of the summit, upwind of the fall. All afternoon, while gray snow buried us, the wind spared them. Barely a dusting fell there. Their trouble was the view. They could see straight up the slope at the thing itself, and being spared the rain and shown the storm, most of them did the wise thing early and left. A smaller town, anyway. Most got out. Some hundreds went down to the boat sheds on the beach, the arched stone bays where the fishing fleet winters, to wait for rescue over the water, the sea being the only open road. Around midnight, the column over the mountain, 30 miles of superheated stone standing on nothing but its own fury, staggered. The edge of it folded and came down the western slope as a glowing cloud, moving at the speed of a diving bird, and it crossed the 4 miles to the shore in the time it takes to say so, and it filled the boat sheds with its heat, and the waiting was over. Quickly, friend. I'll say that word and mean it. Quickly. The studies of the bones, long after, say quicker than knowing. The sea took the cloud's arrival like a struck cymbal and boiled at the edge. The town behind was buried whole, 60 feet deep, so completely and so fast that its wooden stairs and doors and beds were sealed from the air and kept. Which is why, centuries on, Herculaneum, gives the diggers what no other place on earth gives. The wood, the rope, the food on tables, even in one carbonized library, the scrolls. The mountain kept everything it touched. That's the awful, strange mercy running through this whole story. It kept everything. Now you've seen one of the clouds run downhill, so let me give you the science of it, slowly, the way I'd explain rain to a child who asked. It's the last piece you need before dawn. That column over the mountain is a fountain of stone standing on heat. As long as the furnace below throws it up faster than the sky pulls it down, it stands, and its edges cool and fall away as the gray snow we've been wading through. All night the furnace has been winning. But a fountain that tall gets heavier as it gets taller, and several times before morning the furnace loses. The column doesn't topple like a tree. Its lower flanks simply fail, and a slice of that superheated gray stone gas air like a kiln slides off and comes downhill, hugging the ground. The scholars of a later age will call it a pyroclastic surge. Fire broken, the word means near enough, faster than anything alive, hot enough to be its own weapon, and heavier than the air it displaces, so it flows like floodwater, filling streets, pouring over walls, seeking low ground and lungs. Nobody in this century has the word, and I've thought about that all night, and here's where I've landed. The mountain is inventing a word tonight. It will cost this bay 2 towns to coin it, and 18 centuries from now, when other mountains clear their throats, watchmen in other towns will have the word and the drawer to file it in, and they'll clear the slopes in time because Pompeii paid for the vocabulary. That's not nothing, friend. It's the worst way knowledge gets bought, and it's still knowledge. The sheep, the wells, the tremors, the pine tree cloud. After tonight, all of it means something. Warnings only work in a world that's heard the ending once. You're the world that's heard the ending. Sleep in it safely. One more look across the water at Misenum before dawn, because the boy's notes from these exact hours contain my favorite strange detail of the whole night. The tremors there have stopped being tremors and become a condition, the ground moving more or less constantly, the villa creaking like a ship working in a seaway. The household has given up on indoors and moved to the courtyards and the open ground, which is what you did in an earthquake then, and it's what you do in an earthquake now. Some knowledge doesn't age. And out on the forecourt, the carriages have been brought up, ready for flight, and the boy notices something worth the whole price of the letter. The carriages won't stay put. On perfectly level ground, he writes, they rolled backwards and forwards, and even wedging the wheels with stones wouldn't hold them still. Think about that, friend. Ground so restless that a wedged cart wanders. The earth itself pacing, like everyone else on the bay. There's nothing to do with a detail like that except what he did. Write it down and stand clear. But it's the detail that tells you he was really there. Nobody invents the carts. A poet inventing a dreadful night gives you giants and trumpets. We've had those. They arrive a century later from a man who wasn't born yet. The witness gives you luggage that won't hold still. Truth has a texture, and it's almost always the small wrong thing in the corner of the picture. The wedge stone's not working. The coins on the counter. The snore in the corridor. That's how you'll know true accounts from loud ones all your life. The true ones waste their best details on furniture. The hours before dawn, and the town is down to its last few decisions. The ones going, the last wave of them, are wading the drifts to the gates with lamps held high, pillows on their heads, children on shoulders, and they are mostly making it, I want that said again, out the southern gates, onto the high road, into the rest of their lives. Refugee lists in the months to come will show Pompeian families resettled all over Campania, granted land, starting over. The emperor will open the treasury for them. The empire looked after its own that way. Disaster relief is not a modern invention. The ones staying are through deciding, and there's a stillness to them now that I'll respect by walking softly. Lamps in inner rooms. Families gathered in the strongest corner with the water jug and the good cloak and each other. A man in the fig garden by the south wall has brought his household under the fruit trees. Open ground, away from the ticking roofs, 13 of them together in the dark, waiting for morning the way you wait for a ferry. I passed the grand house with my colleague in the floor, the mosaic dog, teeth bared, cave canem under his feet. The real dogs of this town went quiet hours ago, or went south with the carts. He's still at it, never barks, never sleeps, never once left his post. Tonight, of all nights, the best of us. The pumice stands chest high in the open now. The tremors come long and rolling. Across the black bay, one man is still asleep on the beach at Stabiae, and his snore is the steadiest thing in Campania. Last watch of the night, and the ones who are leaving are already on the road. On an ordinary night, this is where I'd tell you that you don't see the dawn arrive in Pompeii, you hear it. First bird, then the gulls, then a rooster with no self-doubt. Not today. The birds went south yesterday, all of them. One more warning, everyone filed. Today the dawn is only a change in the quality of the dark, black giving way to a deep sunless gray, the color of the inside of a bell. Across the bay at Misenum, the boy and his mother watched that non-dawn arrive, and with it, the cloud, no longer content with its mountain, sinking and spreading across the water toward them like a tide coming in from above. The household finally leaves, joining a road of frightened people, and in the middle of that road, a small scene I'd walk past every telling if it weren't the bravest thing in either letter. The mother, older, heavier, slowing, tells her son to drop her hand and run. She'll die content, she says, knowing she wasn't the death of him. He doesn't run. He takes her hand and matches her pace and says they'll go together or not at all. Then the cloud arrives, and the light goes out entirely. Darkness, the boy writes. Not like a cloudy or moonless night, but as when the lamp is put out in a closed room. In that dark he hears the crowd around them calling for each other. Husbands for wives, children for parents, voices trying to be found. He and his mother stand off the road so the crowd won't trample them, and wait, hand in hand, while ash falls so thick they have to stand and shake it off. Again and again, like heavy snow. They live, friend. Remember that through everything the next few minutes bring. The boy and his mother live. At Pompeii, at first light, the furnace loses for the last time. I'll tell it to you the way I saw it. At the distance we agreed on, and then we'll let it be. The column shortened. A gray wall slid off its base and came down the mountain's southern shoulder, crossed the vineyards and the farm roads faster than any rider who ever rode them, met the north wall of this city, and poured over it the way sea fog pours over a harbor mole. It crossed the whole town in less time than I've taken to tell you, and where it passed, the night simply stayed. The town went quiet mid-gesture. The loaves sat in the oven, done now, 81 of them, waiting for a morning that had been canceled. The dog at the grand house kept his post in the floor. The 13 in the fig garden lay down together under the trees, and the ash came down over them like a blanket drawn up over sleepers by some enormous, clumsy, strangely careful hand. That is how the diggers will find nearly everyone, friend, and it's why I keep the word sleepers. Not hiding, not fleeing, lying down, families together, arms over each other. Whatever the last moment held, and the studies say it held very little, held it quicker than knowing. What it left behind looks for all the world like a town that couldn't keep its eyes open one more minute. By the second hour of the morning, there is no Pompeii. There's a smooth gray country where a town was, with the tallest columns of the Forum standing out of it like fence posts in a snowfield, and the rain of gray easing off, its work complete. 12,000 lived here. 10,000, give or take, are on the road south, alive, carrying the town in their heads. The rest stay and keep the watch with me. And on the beach at Stabiae, the Admiral's watch ends too, and history was standing close enough to write it down. Near dawn, his friends wake him. They could hear him sleeping, remember, right up until they couldn't wait any longer. The courtyard outside his room is filling with ash and pumice. Another hour and the door won't open. The house is swaying on its foundations. They debate houses or open ground and choose the beach. Pillows tied over heads with strips of cloth. That trick again. The whole company walking down to the water under little bound cushions, which would be comic if it weren't the end of the world. On the sand, the sea still wild, no sailing out. They spread a sail for him and he sits, asks twice for cold water, drinks it. He's 55, remember, with a chest that whistles on a good day, and the air is not good. When the flames and that sulfur smell come driving down the beach and the company runs, he stands, leaning on 2 slaves, an admiral getting to his feet to face the thing, and his lungs thick with years and ash, refuse the air, and he goes down on the sand, and that, quietly, is that. 2 days later, when the light comes back, they find him on the beach, untouched, unburied, whole, in the clothes he'd worn, and his nephew, writing it years on, reaches past all the eulogy a Roman education could offer and gives him instead the plainest, kindest line in the ancient world. He looked, the boy wrote, more like a man asleep than a man dead. More like a man asleep. That's how the only eyewitness chose to leave him, and it's how I'll leave him too. He came across a burning bay because a friend wrote him a note. He steadied a dinner table and slept to prove it could be done. Fortune favors the brave, he said. She didn't that once, but we got the sentence, and the fleet's boats, in the days after, pulled thousands off these beaches. His rescue worked, friend, just not for him. Here's the part of the story nobody in it got to see. The part where the ash settles and 17 centuries go by. Pompeii didn't burn off the map, you understand. It faded off it. Survivors dug for a while, for strongboxes, for bronze, for people. The emperor's commissioners came and went, and then the digging stopped, and the grass came, and the gray country turned green, and the name of the place drained slowly out of use until the locals were calling the low hill simply La Civita, the city. Nobody remembered which one, and the mountain, having spent itself, went back to being generous. That's the part I'd call cruel if I hadn't watched so many towns. The ash weathered into the blackest, richest soil in Campania, and the vines came back, marching in their combed rows right up the slopes of the thing that fired them, and for centuries people drank good wine grown out of the roof tiles of a city nobody could find. They used to knock the dust off their sandals up there and say the soil was a gift. It was. It always was. The mountain gives and the mountain takes, and it does its bookkeeping in centuries, and it never once lost the town. It kept it, 60 feet down, dark and dry and out of the weather. Every wall painting, every election notice, every scratch joke about Tacitus, every loaf, every receipt in the banker's box, the riot in the parlor, the dog in the floor. The best-kept city of the ancient world, because it was the one that got to sleep through history instead of being worn out by it. Rome above ground was quarried, burned, rebuilt, ruined. Pompeii just slept. Then, one spring, somebody's well digging struck a painted wall. It's 1748 when the digging starts on purpose, 17 centuries after our night, and it starts badly. Treasure trenches for a king, statues hauled off to a palace. But the town is patient. It's had practice, and eventually the right man comes. His name is Giuseppe Fiorelli, and in 1863 he's running the excavation like a census, street by street, numbering every door, and his workmen keep finding these hollows in the hardened ash, person-shaped hollows, where a sleeper lay and the ash set around them and the years took everything but the shape. And Fiorelli has the idea that makes Pompeii Pompeii. Mix plaster. Pour it into the hollow, let it set, chip the ash away, and there they are. The sleepers, given back their shapes. The families in the fig garden, arms over each other, 13 of them, exactly as they lay down. The man by the wall with his face in his hands, resting it, I've always thought, not hiding it. And in the house of Orpheus, the dog, still on his chain, and I'll let you decide whether to smile or ache, because 20 steps away in the house of the tragic poet, the diggers sweep a threshold and find my mosaic colleague, teeth bared, cave Canum, still on duty, and above him in the ash, the real dog who'd kept the real watch. Both of them stayed at their posts. The best of us. I've said it on every watch of this night, and I'll say it into the daylight. The best of us. People will call the casts morbid sometimes. People who haven't stood in front of them. Stand in front of them. They're not screams, friend. Nearly every one is a body at rest, a family folded together, a town lying down. The mountain drew the blanket up, and Fiorelli gently turned it back for a moment so we could see them sleeping. And the mountain? The mountain is still there, friend, green to the shoulders again, vineyards most of the way up. So let me tell you the last turn of the story, the one that's still turning. The watch never ended, it just got instruments. On the slope of Vesuvius in 1841, the King of Naples built a house for exactly one purpose, watching the mountain. the world's first volcano observatory, and it has never once closed. It kept the watch through the eruption of 1872 when its own director stood in the doorway taking notes with the lava in sight of the windows. It kept it through 1906, which was a bad one, and through the last waking in the spring of 1944 in the middle of a world war, when the mountain sent lava through village streets and dusted the bombers on the airfields, and the war had to pause and evacuate people while its own newsreels rolled. That's the most recent word Vesuvius has spoken. Since then, sleep. But watched sleep. Today there are instruments on that mountain the way there are vines. Sensors down its boreholes. Tilt meters on its flanks. Satellites reading the rise and fall of its very skin from orbit. A room of screens in Naples where somebody is on duty at this exact minute. Whatever minute that is for you. Hundreds of thousands of people live on the slopes, and their evacuation plans are written and drilled and argued about in the local papers, which is a very Campanian form of readiness. The sheep and the wells send their warnings now to people with drawers to file them in. That's what Tonight bought all those centuries ago. Somebody has the watch, friend. Somebody always has the watch now. You can sleep on that. Whole cities do. You can go, you know. That's the last practical thing I'll tell you tonight, and then we'll close up. The town takes visitors. They come up the same roads, 2.5 million a year, through the same gates the carts left by. And what gets them, every time, what you'll hear said in 40 languages any given afternoon, is not the tragedy, it's the familiarity. The stepping stones are still set in a row across the streets, and people cross on them, laughing, arms out, exactly the way this town crossed. The wheel ruts are still carved in the stone, and everybody crouches down and puts a hand in them. The election notices still say their names, Helvius Sabinus for Edili. He's still running, friend. Longest campaign in history. The loaves, all 81, sit in museum glass in Naples with the baker's stamp still crisp. The riot painting hangs there too. Awnings out, little figures brawling, a town's bad afternoon framed in gilt. And at the house of the tragic poet, there's usually a small crowd at the threshold, looking down at the floor, at my colleague, teeth bared, chain taut, cave canem, on duty for his third millennium, the most photographed dog in the world. And here's the thing visitors say they don't expect. It's peaceful. Not sad the way a battlefield is sad. Quiet the way a bedroom is quiet. Mid-morning, when someone's still sleeping and the house works around them. Birds in the umbrella pines, the real ones. The mountain over everything, blue and calm, looking exactly like what it is. The neighbor everyone forgave. Cities die when the last person forgets them. By that arithmetic, friend, this is the most alive dead city on earth. 2.5 million people a year come to keep it company while it sleeps. So, the accounting. As the light that isn't quite light comes up over the gray. Was anything saved tonight? Everything, as it turns out, just very slowly. The boy grows up, becomes a lawyer, a senator, a governor, and one day his friend Tacitus, writing the history of these years, asks him, "You were there, weren't you? Tell me how your uncle died." And the grown boy sits down and writes 2 letters, hour by hour, the pine tree, the note from Rectina, the helmsman, the snoring, the hand he wouldn't drop, and then apologizes at the end that none of it is important enough for history. None of it important enough. Friend, those 2 letters are the only clock this night ever had. Every hour I've walked you through, I could walk, because a 17-year-old did his noticing and a historian did his asking. That's what I want to leave you with, as the fountains push the ash off their rims. Somewhere under the gray, still running, they ran for days after, the water not knowing to stop. Everything this town is now, it is because somebody wrote things down. A banker's receipts, a wall of election paint, a boast about a gladiator, a snore in a corridor, 2 letters, paper against the mountain, and in the end, the paper won. They used to tell me this mountain would stand through whatever the summer brings. They were right about the mountain. They were even, in the strangest accounting, right about the town. It stood. It stands tonight, under 60 feet of gray, the best-kept promise in Campania, and 20 centuries of mornings have broken over it and not worn it out. And neither will this one. No tower lamp to give the flame back to tonight, so we'll close the ritual the other way. I'm shutting the little horn door and keeping the flame in. Somebody has to carry it to morning. That's the whole job. That was always the whole job. 6th hour. Morning. In its way. And the watch, friend, the long watch of the little city, is over. Sleep well.